The wind howls across the open desert, dragging whispers of the dying day. A lone horse stands tied to a post, steam rising from its breath in the cold air. Boots crunch against frozen sand, slow, heavy, tired. A man steps forward, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. He's a cowboy, worn by dust and silence, his eyes carrying the weight of miles and mistakes. Inside a small wooden cabin, a fire flickers low. The door creaks open. She stands there, a woman of the Apache, her gaze calm and fierce. The cold wind swirls between them as her voice cuts through the night. Warm my bed tonight, or freeze outside. The cowboy doesn't move. The flames tremble. Somewhere in that silence, something shifts between pride and need, between survival and surrender. This is the story of a man who ran from the world, and a woman who dared him to stop running. A story of fire, frost, and the kind of love that can melt even the coldest soul. The desert stretched endless and cruel beneath a fading sun, its horizon bleeding into the cold edge of night. A single rider moved through the dust, Ethan Cole. A man with no home and no hurry, only the steady rhythm of his horse and the echo of his past. The wind carried nothing but silence, and still it felt heavier than gunfire. His coat was torn at the shoulder, hat frayed at the rim, eyes fixed on a point far away, somewhere between memory and regret. Every step of his horse pressed into the frozen earth like a question the world had already answered. He had lost his ranch 2 winters ago, lost his woman the spring after, and somewhere along the road he had lost his God, too. Night crept fast in the desert, the kind of cold that makes even the stars seem distant. Ethan pulled the reins tight and searched the horizon for smoke, light, anything. His canteen was nearly empty, his hands stiff around the leather strap. Then, through the drifting sand, a faint orange glow flickered in the distance. A fire, small, stubborn, alive. He rode toward it. The wind screamed against his ears as if warning him away, but he didn't stop. He never did. The closer he came, the more he saw. A lonely trading post half swallowed by the desert, walls of sun-bleached wood, and a single lantern swinging in the wind. It looked abandoned, yet the fire burned steady beside the door. Ethan dismounted, boots sinking into the dirt. He could smell wood smoke and sage, the faint sweetness of something cooking, maybe corn, maybe coffee. He hesitated. A man alone in the desert learns not to trust light too easily. But the cold pressed sharp against his bones, and the fire called louder than his fear. He pushed the door open. Inside, the warmth hit him like a dream he'd forgotten he had. The room was dim. Animal hides hung on the walls, shelves lined with jars, a clay pot simmering quietly over the hearth. And there beside the fire, she stood. A woman. Tall, still, wrapped in a blanket of woven red and gold. Her eyes lifted to his like the night had just grown teeth. Apache, he realized. Proud, unreadable. She didn't speak at first, only looked at him. From boots to hat, measuring the kind of man who wandered into a storm without asking permission. Ethan took off his hat, voice low, respectful. Didn't mean to intrude, ma'am. Just looking for shelter. Storm's coming hard. Her answer came slow, careful, each word like a blade being sharpened. The wind brings more than storms, cowboy. He almost smiled, almost. Then I'll try not to bring worse. The fire popped between them, a spark jumping onto the floor. For a heartbeat, neither moved. She turned, ladled something from the pot into a small tin cup, and set it on the table without a word. He stepped closer, nodding his thanks, but her eyes never left him. He drank. The warmth slid down his throat, heavy and strange, like a kindness he hadn't earned. Outside, the wind howled louder, sand scraping the walls like claws. Inside, the silence between them deepened, thick, cautious, alive. Ethan Cole had found his fire for the night. He just didn't know yet that it would change everything. Morning broke like a whisper through the cracks in the wooden walls. pale light slipped across the floorboards, touching the edges of the cabin where shadows still slept. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of a knife scraping against wood. She was already up, the Apache woman, Naya. He'd heard her humming softly, a tune older than the desert itself. Her hands moved steady, slicing dried meat, feeding the small fire like she'd been doing it forever. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "You snore like a tired horse," she said, her voice low, roughened by dawn. Ethan smiled faintly, rubbing his neck. "Guess I'm better company asleep." Still no glance, no grin, just the quiet rhythm of her knife. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the air carried the scent of rain and earth. It was the kind of peace that could vanish in a heartbeat. He stood, adjusted his hat, and looked around. Everything inside her home had purpose. No decoration, no waste. A few clay jars, a bough resting near the door, a horse saddle that looked handmade. She lived like the land, simple, fierce, unyielding. "I'm grateful for the shelter," he said finally. "Didn't mean to trouble you." She set the knife down and turned, eyes sharp as obsidian. "You didn't trouble me. You troubled the wind." He frowned. "The wind?" She walked past him, opened the door, and looked out at the horizon. "Men like you bring change. Trouble follows you the way dust follows hose." He wanted to argue, but her words cut too close to truth. He'd been running for months, from lawmen, from memories, from himself. "What should I call you?" he asked, voice soft. She paused. "Naya." He nodded. "Ethan." "I didn't ask," she said flatly, though a flicker of amusement touched her mouth. He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his chest. He hadn't laughed in a long time. They spent the day working in uneasy silence. She gave him chores without speaking much, chopping wood, fixing a loose shutter, fetching water from the well. Every so often he'd catch her watching him, not with suspicion now, but with quiet curiosity. When the sun began to sink again, painting the world gold and red, Ethan brought an armful of wood to the cabin. She was sitting outside, weaving something with long strands of horsehair, her fingers sure and graceful. "You live out here alone?" he asked. Naya didn't answer right away. Her eyes followed the sun as it dropped behind the hills. Alone is a word made by men who fear silence. He looked at her, really looked, at the strength in her hands, the stillness in her face, the sadness she tried to bury beneath it all. That night, when the fire burned low again, she spoke first. "You were with the soldiers once." Ethan froze. "How do you know that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Your belt, the Buckles cavalry issue, and your eyes, they've seen too much killing to belong to a drifter." He swallowed hard. "Not proud of those years." "Then maybe there's still hope," she said softly. Outside, coyotes called to one another under the moon. Inside, two strangers sat by the same fire, one haunted by the past, the other by everything the past had taken. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he couldn't name. Not warmth, not yet, but something that might become it. The night had been long, but the day felt longer. The storm outside had passed, yet something heavier lingered in the air between them. The desert was quiet now, soaked in silver light, and the smoke from the morning fire curled lazily toward the ceiling. Ethan sat near the door, whittling a piece of wood to steady his hands. Across from him, Naya crushed herbs into a small clay bowl, her movements precise, deliberate, as though every motion had meaning. Neither spoke for a while. The fire crackled. The horse outside stamped against the cold. Then she said, almost to herself, "You still carry the sound of war." Ethan looked up, the knife pausing in his grip. "That sound doesn't fade easy." Her eyes rose to meet his. "For some, it never fades at all." He nodded slowly. "I've tried to bury it." "Men bury many things," she said. "But the earth remembers." The silence after her words was heavy enough to feel. Ethan stared into the fire. "I did things I'm not proud of," he said finally. "Told myself I was following orders." But that don't help you sleep when faces start visiting your dreams. Nia didn't answer. She picked up a burning stick and stirred the coals. You were with them, the ones who burned my people's village. It wasn't a question. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. Yes, I was there, but I didn't shoot. I tried to stop it. They called me a traitor for it. Her jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. So you ran. He nodded once. Ran ever since. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the wind outside moved, brushing against the thin walls. Then, slowly, Nia stood and walked toward him. Her bare feet were silent on the wood. She stopped close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin against the cold air. You think the desert will forgive you? She asked. No, he said quietly. But maybe you will. Her lips curved, not in a smile, but something like understanding. Forgiveness is not for me to give, cowboy. The fire does not forgive the cold. It only burns it away. The flames danced between them, bright and alive, their light catching in her eyes. She turned toward the small bed tucked in the corner, its blanket woven with patterns of red and black. Her voice dropped low, steady as thunder in the distance. Warm my bed tonight, she said, each word soft as smoke, or freeze outside. The knife slipped from Ethan's hand, falling silently onto the floor. For a moment the world stood still, the crackle of fire, the whisper of wind, her heartbeat echoing through the quiet. He didn't answer, didn't move. The firelight shimmered across her face, half shadow, half flame. In her gaze, he saw everything he'd been running from, fear, forgiveness, and something deeper that neither of them dared to name. He stepped closer, just enough for the warmth to touch his skin. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside, the fire burned steady. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole didn't feel the cold. The wind came again before dawn, dragging a storm across the plains. The cabin groaned under the weight of it, the roof boards shivering as if the whole world wanted to break apart. Ethan sat awake beside the fire, boots still on, his rifle across his knees. He hadn't slept. Nia lay turned away from him, her breathing soft, steady, a rhythm that reminded him there was still something human left inside the wild. When she stirred, the storm had swallowed the sky. Rain came hard, sharp as gravel. She rose without a word, fed the fire, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. For a long time neither spoke. It wasn't the silence of anger now. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that comes when two people finally stop pretending they don't feel the same ache. Ethan's voice broke the quiet. You ever think about leaving this place? She shook her head. This land is my blood. It remembers me even when I try to forget it. He nodded, staring into the flames. Maybe that's what I've been missing. A place that remembers me. Nia turned, her dark eyes steady on his. Places remember what you give them. So far, you've only given the wind. Her words hit harder than she meant. He looked down, thumb tracing the worn wood of his rifle. I used to believe I could build something that lasted. A ranch. A family. But the more I built, the more the world took. Then build again, she said simply. He wanted to tell her it wasn't that easy, that some men weren't meant to stay anywhere. But before he could speak, thunder cracked so close it shook the walls. The sound rolled through the valley, and then came the drumming of hooves outside. Ethan rose, his instincts flaring. He moved to the window. Through the rain, he saw 3 riders pushing through the storm, dark shapes against the gray. He knew that look. Soldiers or worse. The kind who carried orders in one hand and death in the other. Nia was already pulling her bow from the wall. You know them. Maybe. Or maybe they just know me. Her voice hardened. Then we both have ghosts coming. The riders stopped a few yards from the cabin. One of them shouted over the rain, Ethan Cole, you're wanted for desertion aiding hostiles. Step outside, and maybe you die quick. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. He glanced at Naya, and for a heartbeat, they shared the same thought: run, fight, survive. But she just said stay inside. This is my land, my storm. He shook his head. Not anymore. I brought this here. She stepped closer, eyes burning through the dim light. No, cowboy. The world brought this. You just stopped running long enough for it to find you. Outside, lightning split the sky. The men dismounted, their boots splashing through the mud. Ethan moved to the door, checked the rifle's chamber, and whispered, "If I don't walk back through that door, you know what to do." Naya caught his arm. "And if you do walk back?" He managed a crooked smile. "Then maybe the wind's done chasing me." The door swung open, and the storm swallowed him whole. Rain hammered against his hat brim, lightning flashing across the faces of the men waiting for him. Words were lost to the thunder, and soon after, so was the peace. The desert didn't care who was right or wrong. It only remembered who was left when the fire burned out. And inside that small cabin, Naya stood with her bow ready, her heart steady, waiting for the sound of a man who had finally stopped running. Rain still fell in ragged sheets, painting the world in gray. The cabin's door hung open, creaking with every gust. Naya stood frozen just inside the threshold, bow in hand, eyes fixed on the blur of movement through the storm. 3 men, maybe 4, shapes twisting in the flashes of lightning. Somewhere out there, Ethan's voice rose, a single shout swallowed by thunder. She ran into the rain. The ground sucked at her feet, mud heavy as guilt. She caught sight of him near the corral, rifle raised, hat gone, face streaked with blood and water. 2 of the riders lay still in the mud. The last one, a broad man with a scar running down his jaw, had his gun trained square on Ethan's chest. "Drop it," the bounty hunter barked. Ethan hesitated, chest heaving. "You'll shoot me anyway." "Maybe," the man said. "But I'll enjoy it more if you make me." Naya's bowstring drew tight, rain dripping from her hair. Her voice was steady. "Then maybe you won't enjoy much at all." The man turned, startled by the sound. That half-second was all Ethan needed. The rifle cracked, echoing through the canyon like thunder breaking bone. The bounty hunter dropped to his knees, his gun spinning into the mud. Silence followed, thick, alive, electric. Ethan stumbled toward her, breathing hard. "You shouldn't have come out here." She lowered the bow slowly. "You shouldn't have made me need to." They stood in the downpour, eyes locked. The rain softened for a moment, as if even the sky was listening. But peace never lasts long in the desert. Another shot rang out from the ridge. Ethan jerked back, pain flaring through his side. He fell. Naya caught him before he hit the ground, the warmth of his blood spreading through her hands. "Stay with me," she whispered, dragging him toward the cabin. The storm swallowed her words. She kicked the door shut behind him and laid him by the fire. His breathing was shallow, his face pale beneath the flicker of light. She tore fabric from her blanket, pressed it against the wound, and whispered words in her native tongue, half prayer, half command. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. You should have run." She shook her head. "I have done enough running for one lifetime." Outside, hoofbeats faded into the distance. Whoever fired that shot was gone, leaving only the rain and the ragged sound of 2 people still fighting to stay alive. Hours passed before Ethan stirred again. The fire had burned low, the wind quieter now, carrying only the smell of wet earth. He turned his head toward her. "Why didn't you let me die out there?" She didn't look at him when she answered. "Because death is the easy way out. And men like you don't deserve easy." Her words cut, but her voice trembled just enough to betray the truth. She'd been scared. He tried to sit up, but she pressed him back gently. "Rest," she said. "The storm's not done yet." He closed his eyes, the crackle of the fire pulling him under. And as sleep claimed him, he realized something strange. For the first time in years, the sound of the storm didn't scare him, because for the first time in years, someone was waiting for him to wake. Morning came slow, dragging pale light through the cracks of the cabin walls. The storm had broken sometime in the night, but the air was still heavy, thick with the smell of gunpowder and rain. Ethan woke with a low groan, hand instinctively reaching for the wound in his side. Pain reminded him he was still alive. Naya sat near the door, ball across her knees, eyes sharp and sleepless. She hadn't moved much through the night. The fire burned low, more ember than flame, its soft glow tracing the edge of her face. For a while neither spoke. Only the faint hiss of the dying fire filled the room. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You stayed up all night?" "I've seen too many mornings that ended worse than the nights before," she said softly. He tried to smile, but it came out weak. "Guess that makes two of us." She moved closer, knelt beside him, and checked the wound. "You'll live," she murmured, pressing fresh herbs against the bandage. "If you don't start doing something foolish again." He winced, but managed a quiet chuckle. "Cowboys are good at foolish." "You're good at surviving what should have killed you," she replied. "That's different." He watched her as she worked, steady hands, eyes that never flinched. There was no fear in her, just resolve. The kind that grows in people who've buried too much to waste tears on what's already gone. A sudden sound broke through the quiet, a distant thud like boots striking wet ground. Then another, then voices. Naya froze, bowstring already half-drawn. Ethan struggled to sit up, pain flashing through him. "They came back," he said under his breath. Outside, the crunch of footsteps circled the cabin. A man's voice called out mocking, "The hero's still breathing, huh? Guess the bounty's worth the wait." Ethan's jaw tightened. He grabbed his revolver from the table and checked the chamber. 3 bullets left," he muttered. Naya's eyes met his. "Then make each one count." The first shot shattered the morning calm. Wood splintered as bullets tore through the walls. Naya rolled to the floor, loosing an arrow through the open window. A man screamed outside. Ethan fired next, his aim sharp despite the pain. The echoes of gunfire tangled with the echo of thunder still lingering in the hills. For a few moments it was chaos, smoke, shouting, and the smell of blood and rain mixing in the air. Then silence. A heavy, uncertain silence. Ethan coughed, leaning against a wall. "How many?" Naya stepped to the window, eyes narrowing. 2 down. One's running." He nodded. "Let him run. Maybe he'll tell the others I'm already dead." She turned to him, voice low. "And are you?" He looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "Not yet." "Not while I've still got something worth staying for." The fire crackled again, breaking the quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The land smelled clean, like a wound trying to heal. Naya lowered her bow and sat beside him, her breath still unsteady. "You risk your life for a woman you barely know," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what life's for, doing something that finally makes sense even if it kills you." She stared into the dying fire, her voice barely more than a whisper. "No one ever stayed for me before." He reached out, his hand brushing hers, rough meeting steady, warmth finding warmth. "Then maybe it's time someone did." Outside, the sky cleared, and a single line of sunlight touched the edge of the cabin floor. Inside, 2 souls who had spent their lives fighting the cold finally found a little bit of warmth worth holding on to. The storm had left the land quiet again, a silence so deep it almost felt sacred. The world outside the cabin was washed clean, the earth dark and soft beneath the pale morning sun. Smoke rose from the dying fire, curling into the air like a prayer no one could hear. Ethan stirred slowly, wincing as the pain in his side reminded him that he was still made of flesh, still mortal. Naya sat beside him, grinding herbs in a small bowl, her movements careful, almost tender. When she saw his eyes open, she spoke without looking at him. "You're lucky the bullet passed through," she said. A little higher, and you'd be meeting your ghost." He managed a small grin. "Would have been a short conversation." She gave a quiet snort, the closest she'd come to laughing since he met her. "You talk too much for a dead man." He studied her in the soft light, the steadiness in her hands, the dark strands of hair that fell loose against her cheek, the strength that seemed to live in every quiet breath she took. "You saved me again," he said softly. She kept working. "You were too heavy to bury." He chuckled, but it turned into a cough. She steadied him, her hand light against his chest, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no need for words. Gratitude, fear, something unspoken, all of it passed between them like the warmth of the fire. He glanced toward the window where the sun was rising over the hills. "They'll come back for me," he said. "Men like that don't stop till they've got what they came for." Naya shook her head. "No, the desert takes what it wants." And today, it took them. He looked at her, confused, but she didn't explain. She simply poured a small cup of water, handed it to him, and said, "Rest. You owe your life a little patience." Hours passed. The wind outside had softened, carrying only the faint sound of birds returning after the storm. Ethan dozed in and out of dreams, faces, fire, the echo of Naya's voice. When he woke again, the room smelled of herbs and cedar smoke. She was sitting near the doorway, sewing something small, a tear in his coat. "You don't have to fix that," he murmured. Her eyes didn't lift. Everything worth keeping needs mending. He watched her fingers move, swift and sure. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked. She paused, needle midair. "Starting over is for people who had something before." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we start from nothing. Together." She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched deep and heavy until the fire cracked and filled it. Then softly she said, "The desert doesn't promise forever, cowboy. It only gives you the day." "Then I'll take the day," he said. "And tomorrow, if it's kind enough to come." Her hand slowed. She looked at him, eyes softer now, and something in her face changed, like the storm inside her had finally lost its fight. She reached out, touched his hand gently, and said, "Sleep. The world can wait till morning." He nodded, his body sinking into the quiet. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Naya sitting beside the fire, her shadow dancing on the wall, the light catching the edge of her face, half fire, half peace. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole felt like he had finally come home. Days passed like slow-moving clouds, each one softer than the one before. The land began to heal, grass sprouting along the creek bed, the air carrying the faint smell of new rain. Ethan's wound mended under Naya's careful hands, and soon he could walk again, though every step reminded him of how close he had come to losing it all. He spent his mornings splitting wood, mending fences that barely stood, and feeding the horses. Naya watched him from the doorway, her face unreadable, yet her eyes always followed him longer than she meant them to. Sometimes he caught her looking, and she would turn away, pretending to busy herself with something else, grinding herbs, folding blankets, stirring the pot over the fire. At night they shared quiet. No more storms, no more gunfire, just the sound of the desert breathing outside their walls. The fire between them had changed. It wasn't born of danger anymore, but of something gentler, something real. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting the world in gold and ember, Ethan sat by the fire with his guitar, a relic he'd carried through too many towns. The strings were worn, the wood scarred, but when he played, it was like the land itself leaned to listen. Naya sat beside him, silent, her gaze fixed on the flame. He strummed softly and said, "You ever hear a cowboy song, Naya?" She shook her head. "I've heard men sing to the wind, never to the fire." He smiled. "Then I'll start a new kind." His voice was low, rough, carrying years of dust and regret. He sang of red skies and empty roads, of ghosts that never learned to rest, and of a woman who looked at a broken man and saw something worth saving. When he finished, the night felt heavier, fuller. Naya's voice came quiet. "Why do you sing of pain?" "'Cause that's all I ever knew," he said. "Till now." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes reflecting the fire. "The desert takes many things," she whispered. "But sometimes it gives something back." He reached for her hand. It was warm, steady. Their fingers intertwined, not in hunger, but in peace. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was whole. Later, as the stars returned, she leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. The fire crackled softly, and he could feel her heartbeat against his arm. He turned slightly, his voice almost a breath. "Warm my bed tonight," he said with a small smile. Her answer came like a promise. "And never freeze again." Outside, the desert stretched endless and still. Inside that little cabin, two souls, once lost to the wind, found what they never thought they would, warmth that didn't fade when morning came. And as the fire burned low, the wind outside passed over them, soft this time, almost kind, as if it too had finally learned to rest. Years later, the desert still whispered their names. Travelers passing through spoke of a cabin hidden beyond the canyon ridge, where smoke rose every evening and the sound of a guitar drifted through the wind. Some said a cowboy lived there alone. Others swore he shared the fire with a woman whose eyes could quiet any storm. No one knew for certain, but every man who heard the story looked toward the horizon a little longer before moving on. They called it the tale of fire and frost, a story born from a night too cold for mercy and a heart too tired to keep running. Ethan Cole had come to the edge of the world searching for a place to die. Instead, he found a reason to live. And Naya, the woman who once swore she needed no one, learned that even the fiercest fire can still crave warmth. The years softened them, like rain carving the edge from stone. Seasons passed, storms came and went, but the fire inside that cabin never went out. Sometimes in the deep of night the wind carried her laughter across the valley, gentle and wild, the kind that could make even the stars pause to listen. No one ever found their graves, only a single blanket left folded on the bed, and beside it a guitar strings rusted, worn smooth by time. The last thing carved into its back were 6 simple words cut by a steady hand: "Warm my bed tonight." Always. And so the story lived on, passed from campfire to campfire, from cowboy to drifter. Because some loves aren't written in books or remembered in stone, they live in the air, in the heat of a flame, and in the quiet hearts that still believe the desert can be kind. And if you felt the warmth of this story, don't forget to let it linger a little longer. Hit that like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you don't miss the next tale from the Wild West. Every view, every comment keeps these stories alive under the same wide sky that once held Ethan and Naya. Until the next fire burns and another story begins, thanks for watching, and may your nights always stay warm. Fire Cactus Redheart.